Arial and scissor lifts. Not everything we have to work on is within our reach. There are times we need a little help. Sometimes ladders are chosen, other times fixed scaffolds, and still other times mobile equipment like aerial lifts, also referred to as articulating boom bucket lifts and scissor lifts. Working safely with this last category will be the focus of this course. Safety is our primary concern when using any equipment to access work at heights. When we're above the ground, falls can occur if we're not careful. Statistics consistently show that falls from heights are among the leading causes of workplace fatalities. Many other fatalities are caused by electrocution and contact with overhead machinery. Investigations of these incidents indicate that being careful at heights is more than just common sense. Operating mobile equipment at high elevations can be risky, and you need good habits and good information to make good decisions. After completing this training, you'll be able to identify different types of mobile equipment to use when your work is out of reach. Explain the importance of lift and site inspection before use. Recognize causes of falls from mobile equipment. Describe precautions to help prevent falls, tip-over, and catapulting. And identify hazards such as contact with power lines or other moving equipment. Let's begin with the two basic types of mobile equipment used when work is out of reach. These are aerial lifts and scissor lifts. An aerial lift is a device that is designed and manufactured to raise personnel to an elevated work position on a platform supported by masts or booms. Aerial lifts include extensible or articulating boom platforms, aerial ladders, vertical towers, and a combination of any such devices. The other type of mobile equipment commonly used is the scissor lift. Scissor lifts are designed to lift larger loads and provide more workspace than other aerial lifts, but they are not designed for lifting extremely heavy materials. Know the capacity limit of any lift you use, whether aerial or scissor lift, and do not exceed this rated capacity. Scissor lifts are often used in manufacturing and industrial work, where multiple workers need to be on the same platform. Most scissor lifts only lift straight up and down, though some allow you to shift the platform horizontally a short distance, and many allow you to drive the machine with the platform raised. However, for better stability, easier avoidance of overhead obstructions, and increased visibility of ground-level obstructions, it's generally advisable to lower the platform before moving long distances. Here's a learning activity concerning aerial lifts versus scissor lifts. Try to match the aspect on the right to the applicable type of mobile equipment by dragging and dropping. The majority of fatalities resulting from use or misuse of aerial lifts and scissor lifts are a result of unrestrained falls and tip-overs. Electrocution and contact with overhead machinery are other prominent concerns. Let's look at each way that falls and tip-overs occur and explore precautions you can take to prevent these accidents. Falls and tip-overs can result from your actions or inaction before you even get in the equipment. One potential cause is choosing the wrong lift for the application. Consider what your task requires and then select the appropriate lift. For example, indoor lifts, or slab lifts as they're sometimes called, are meant to be operated on flat, regular surfaces. These lifts are not designed to be used on rough, outdoor terrain. They can easily tip if misused in this manner. Insulated lifts provide protection against inadvertent contact with energized electrical conductors, so use these lifts if you'll be working near power lines. However, insulated lifts do not protect you if there's another path to ground. For instance, if you touch another wire connected to the ground. Do not exceed vertical or horizontal reach limits, or your lift may tip over. Using equipment you've not been trained to operate is unwise. Due to its potential dangers, only trained and authorized persons should operate an aerial lift. Dangers significantly increase for untrained operators who do not know how to recognize and avoid unsafe conditions and hazards. Some regions require training to take place before an aerial work platform permit is issued. Operator training should cover electrical, fall, and falling object hazards, proper lift operation, including maximum intended load and load capacity, and manufacturer requirements. Each type of equipment is different, and you need to be familiar with operating features and controls. Check with your supervisor to see if additional training is required, such as when hazards change, and be sure to take that training in a controlled environment, a comfortable one free of potential hazards. Always check the operator's manual and equipment warning labels before operating a new lift. If your lift has been rented, ask the dealer or company renting out the lift for the operator's manual. Always remove the keys from the lift when you leave it unattended to prevent the lift from being operated by someone who's untrained or unauthorized. Not performing a pre-use inspection can cause problems once you're on the lift. Follow the manufacturer's instructions to perform the pre-use inspection. This inspection includes not only the equipment you'll use, but also means inspecting the work environment for potential hazards. Click the link for components to inspect before each use. Issues such as leaking fluids, hissing or grinding sounds, and erratic movement are cause for concern. Only use lifts that have passed inspection. If you discover an unsafe condition, tag the lift out of service and report the issue immediately so that it can be corrected. In addition to pre-use inspections, follow manufacturer's recommendations for periodic detailed inspections. Insulated lifts also have special electrical test requirements to ensure safety. Not surveying the area for potential hazards can lead to an accident. Survey the area where the lift will be operated for overhead electrical lines, machinery and moving equipment, material and debris. soft ground, floor condition and drop-offs, and pedestrians and other work activities. Address hazards by taking precautions such as barricades, signs, insulation, de-energization, and lockout-tagout. Remember, overhead hazards are not really hazards at all until you raise the lift and reduce the normal separation distance. For this reason, overhead hazards are often less protected than ground-level working area hazards. It's time to review what you've learned so far. Accidental contact with energized electrical conductors can result in severe shock or electrocution. Which of the following precautions would help you stay safe around overhead power lines? What should you do if you discover a potentially unsafe condition with your lift during your pre-use inspection? You've learned about causes of accidents that happen before you even get in the equipment. Now let's see what can happen when you're at the work site and the mobile equipment is stationary. Using an Arial or scissor lift as a crane is dangerous. Lifts are meant to lift personnel and essential tools, equipment, and materials. Check the manufacturer's labels and the operator's manual to determine the capacity before placing anything heavy on a lift. Do not rig materials to be lifted from the structure of the lift. This can cause serious balance and capacity issues. Not extending the stabilizers or outriggers. Lifts are more susceptible to tip over without stabilizers or outriggers extended. Remember that you, your tools, and materials are all part of the load that's being lifted. Many lifts are not designed to lift any load to any height without stabilizers in place. As stated previously, the majority of lift-related fatalities result from falls and tip-overs. Always use these for your protection and follow manufacturer's directions to extend outriggers as necessary. Using lifts in high winds. Use in gusty or sustained high winds is not recommended because these conditions can result in swaying and increased chance of tip-over. Recommended maximum wind speeds can vary from lift to lift, but are generally in the range of 15 to 25 miles per hour. But don't let the wind speed be your sole guide. Also factor in these principles. As your lift gains altitude, it becomes more vulnerable to winds of all speeds. The direction your lift faces into the wind can also affect its stability, and wind conditions aloft may differ from those on the ground. Be prepared for stronger winds as your lift elevates. Be sure to follow the manufacturer's guidelines regarding maximum wind speeds for the lift that you'll be operating. Let's review that. An aerial lift is safe to use in which of the following instances? You've made it safely to the work site. You've extended the outriggers or stabilizers, and now it's time to get in the equipment. Here are 3 causes of falls that occur when getting onto the platform or bucket. Mud, grease, etc. on shoes or lift access ladder rungs. Check your shoes and the ladder rungs. Clean off any grease, mud, or other foreign substances before ascending. Not maintaining 3 points of contact when climbing lift access ladders. This means keeping both feet and one hand or both hands and one foot on the ladder at all times. Obviously, this is hard to do if you're carrying tools, which brings us to our next point. Carrying tools, equipment, or materials when climbing lift access ladders. Place tools, equipment, and materials on the lift prior to climbing, or wait until you've climbed onto the platform and then lift or hoist these items up using a rope. Once you've safely made it to the platform or bucket and are elevated above ground level, your risk of a fall or tip-over increases. Here are 5 accident causes to avoid once you're on the platform or bucket. Not closing the lift gate or chain after boarding. This is the most straightforward precaution yet. Always close the lift gate or chain after boarding. Clutter on the lift's working surface. It's easy to trip over clutter, so observe good housekeeping practices. Clean up as you go, and only take as much material or tools as needed for immediate work activities. Stepping up on guardrails, tow boards, and materials or equipment inside the lift. Avoid stepping up when on the platform. When you're above guardrails, they will not provide you with the same level of protection as when your feet are on the platform. Working with balance outside the guardrails. Reorient the lift rather than leaning over the guardrails to reach what you need. Remember, if your weight is outside the guardrails, you're one unexpected bump from toppling over and out of the lift. Lift struck by other moving equipment. Put a barricade under overhead activity you're conducting. This buffers you from equipment traffic and protects those on the ground from tools or materials that may be dropped. Communicate plans to use lifts so other equipment operators can expect your presence. Use horns and other signaling devices to make your presence known. Your work is finished, but not your risk of falls or tip-overs. One cause of an accident that occurs when exiting the platform or bucket is not following proper procedures to leave the lift at elevations. Many manufacturers discourage this practice, pointing out that lifts are intended to serve as work surfaces, not people movers. Check the manufacturer's instructions if you must dismount the lift at heights. The manufacturer's procedure will likely require you to wear a fall protection harness and establish a tie-off point before dismounting. Tying off is serious business. One slip and your harness and lanyard, along with what you've tied to, will be all that stands between you and the ground below. You'll want all the information that you can get. At a minimum, you'll need to know when to tie off, how to inspect and use your equipment, and which points are acceptable for tie-off. Check with your supervisor for additional training if your work requires tie-off. Not using the ladder to climb down. Step off the ladder after climbing down all the rungs. Do not jump off. Why risk a twisted or broken ankle on the last step? Never, under any circumstance, walk or climb on the boom to gain access to or leave the platform. Just as when you climbed up, maintain 3 points of contact when descending ladders. How are you doing keeping all of these causes and precautions straight? Here are some more questions to see what you remember. What should you check for on ladder rungs? Which of these items are acceptable for stepping onto for extending your reach when you're on the lift platform? You should receive training on the following topics before performing fall protection tie-off. When to tie off, how to inspect and use tie-off equipment, and what. You have now seen a number of causes of accidents that occur when an aerial lift or scissor lift is stationary. Now let's see what can happen when this mobile equipment is actually moving. Unsafe practices with a moving lift can cause the general type of accident referred to as catapulting. The boom bounce that happens when aerial lifts roll over potholes and surface irregularities can literally catapult workers to the ground. Use fall protection, such as travel restraint or fall arrest, 100% of the time when in an aerial lift. If a catapulting happens, workers who are tied off with short lanyards will be restrained from falling out of the lift. Workers who are tied off with longer lanyards may fall out of the lift, but should be stopped before hitting the ground. The forces involved in stopping a fall can damage some lifts or cause a lift to tip over. Workers need to learn about the lift they'll be operating. If the operator's manual requires travel restraint to prevent falls rather than arrest falls, then restraint must be used. Workers also need to learn about their lift's designated anchor point for tying off. Guardrails are typically too weak for fall protection tie-off. When using a personal fall arrest or restraint system, inspect it prior to each use for wear, damage, and other deterioration. Remove defective components from service. Let's look at some causes of tip-over and catapulting and what you can do to prevent them. Driving near unprotected edges, curbs, soft ground, floor holes, or excessively sloped surfaces. Anytime you shift balance of the lift from side to side, you risk tip-over. Generally speaking, a lift will not withstand a drop-off of more than a few centimeters without tipping. Refer to manufacturer directions for specific capabilities of the lift that you'll be operating, including how steep a grade you may safely travel. Survey the area for hazards prior to each day's work. Ensure proper lighting so you can see your pathway, and always look in the direction that you're driving. The effect on an aerial lift of a collapsing floor is similar to driving on soft ground. Know the floor loading capacities of surfaces that you travel on. Some floors may not accept the loaded weight of your lift. Also, keep in mind that plywood covers meant to keep people from walking into floor holes are almost always too weak to support the lift you'll be operating. Do not drive over them. Improper procedures while traveling on acceptable grades. The general rule with a forklift is always travel with the load upgrade. This is to enhance stability, maneuverability, and stopping ability. The same concept applies to the use of mobile lifts. In this case, always travel with the counterweight up grade. Also, as with forklifts, turning on grades is a risky proposition. Follow the manufacturer's directions. Here's another set of questions. See how well you can do. 3 of these precautions can be taken against driving into obstructions, drop-offs, and uneven surfaces. Which precaution addresses a different set of risks? When operating a mobile lift, always travel with the counterweight what? The last causes of accidents when the equipment is moving result from stepping off due to not closing the lift gate or chain after boarding, or being crushed or knocked off a lift by contact with overhead obstructions. Remember, always close the lift gate or chain after boarding to help keep you inside the bucket or platform. Only move the lift in a lowered position. Lowering the lift before moving and surveying the area before lifting again can help avoid contact with overhead obstructions. Contact could result in falls and tips, as well as electrical shock, crushing, or lacerations. Pay attention to surroundings when making small adjustments to your position, and always look in the direction you are driving. Arial and scissor lifts are extremely useful and highly utilized in today's workplace, yet they present great danger if improperly used. By taking this course, you have made a commitment to understanding steps that can be taken to avoid accidents. Understanding what to do is just the first step. Now you need to take this information to the field and practice what you've learned. See your supervisor if you have any questions about the material as it applies to the lifts you'll be using in your work environment. This concludes our training on aerial and scissor lifts. You should now be able to identify different types of mobile equipment to use when your work is out of reach. Explain the importance of lift and site inspection before use. Recognize causes of falls from mobile equipment. Describe precautions to help prevent falls, tip-over, and catapulting. And identify hazards such as contact with power lines or other moving equipment. This concludes the course.